Welcome back to the deep dive. If you're familiar with Central Texas, specifically the Bryan and College Station area, you probably know the RELLIS campus. It's really synonymous with high-tech research and, well, growth.
That's right.
But, beneath all the shiny announcements about new innovation corridors and advanced energy projects, we found this multi-layered conflict brewing.
Mhm.
So today's deep dive is really about this high-stakes convergence of massive technological ambition, the local political green light for development, and fundamentally a crisis involving water. Its quantity, its quality, and this kind of hidden geological fight to keep it usable.
Yeah, we're tracking what feels like a classic Texas resource tension, but it's really amplified here by all this futuristic technology. The
Yeah.
stage is set for really rapid, high-density growth that needs, reliable power and just huge amounts of water.
Right.
And this growth is now clashing, like, directly with existing demands. These ongoing water export lawsuits from powerful regional players like Sanderson Farms and maybe most dangerously, the hidden geological legacy of, well, a century of oil and gas activity.
So we've synthesized sources detailing this perfect storm, really. We're looking at the green lighting of these massive water and energy users. We're talking data centers, potentially powered by a nuclear facility right in the middle of a region that's already tangled up in legal fights over resource scarcity.
Exactly.
Our mission here is to connect these sort of surface level political and economic decisions to the really profound subsurface risks involving produced water and potentially aquifer contamination.
Yeah.
Okay, let's unpack this. The data stack we have suggests this isn't just some political squabble or, a permitting issue. It feels more like a high-stakes environmental calculus where the future of the region's most vital resource really hangs in the balance.
We really have to start with the technological catalyst, I think, because the sheer scale of the power and the resource requirement pretty much dictates the regional response. The big headline that kicked this all off was the Texas A&M Systems announcement, right? An agreement to build a nuclear reactor right there on the RELLIS campus.
Okay, nuclear. Why nuclear specifically? I mean, if the goal is just to invite high-tech business, why can't they just, plug into the existing Texas grid? Why such a massive infrastructure commitment?
That's a critical point. This isn't about just general power for, say, a new factory. This is about providing high-density, super reliable baseload power. It's the kind of robust 247 energy needed for the most advanced computing.
Like AI data centers.
Exactly. We're talking modern data centers built to run AI, machine learning models, specifically things like large language models. These operations are just exponentially more power hungry than, say, standard internet cloud services. They demand perfect uptime, measured often in megawatts per facility. And the existing regional grid infrastructure, well, it's already stressed during peak demand sometimes. It simply cannot provide the kind of non-negotiable stability they absolutely require. So nuclear power becomes the necessary engine that enables this kind of high-tech corridor.
And the local government, it seems, immediately rolled out the red carpet. We saw the Bryan City Council actively paving the way for what they're calling high-tech development within this innovation corridor.
Yes, and that local action, that specific city council decision, that's the critical green light on the demand side of things. They are actively inviting these massive new users into the area. They're essentially creating an industrial ecosystem designed to capitalize on that robust nuclear power supply being planned at RELLIS.
Ah,
What's fascinating here is how these local councils are making decisions that invite, global scale resource consumption companies like Amazon, Google, maybe other big AI firms, right into a local resource market.
but those users, the data centers, they don't just run on reliable kilowatts, right? They are notoriously, almost shockingly, water intensive. It feels like a massive input requirement that often gets overshadowed by all the talk about electricity.
That's absolutely correct. The sheer heat generated by running these massive computing clusters, it requires constant, reliable cooling just to prevent hardware meltdown.
Makes sense.
And they use enormous amounts of water for that, often evaporating it directly into the atmosphere just to maintain the right temperature. The global scrutiny on this is really intensifying because of it. Like the Common Dream source highlights, there's a growing global backlash against AI data centers precisely because of this colossal water appetite.
And the scale of this consumption, it's now demanding unprecedented transparency, isn't it? The Guardian source emphasizes this recent focus on water use disclosure by major tech companies. It's no longer acceptable for these facilities to just hide behind proprietary data. Communities are demanding to know exactly how many millions of gallons they're pulling out of already stressed regional supplies.
Yeah, and to put that in perspective for you, the listener, we could be talking about consumption rivaling that of a small city just to keep servers cool.
Wow, a whole city's worth of water.
Potentially, yeah.
Yeah.
And crucially, this isn't just passive water use, it's often rapid evaporation. That means the water is basically permanently removed from the local watershed loop. It's simply an unsustainable rate of consumption if it's not sourced very, very responsibly.
So, okay, if the city council is focused on economic growth, wouldn't they have done like a rigorous public study on water usage before greenlighting these developments? Does this rapid approval maybe suggest a lack of transparency or, I don't know, maybe political short-sightedness when they're faced with the promise of nuclear power and high-tech jobs?
Well, it certainly suggests that the economic upside, the promise of a stable, high-tech tax base,
Mm.
often outweighs the immediate environmental calculus in local governance. It happens a lot. The decision prioritizes securing the power source, the nuclear plant, and attracting the industry, the data centers. And it effectively treats the required water as just an assumed readily available resource. Even though the region is already facing, acute scarcity issues, the arrival of these facilities, it's like opening a massive perpetual industrial faucet in an already strained plumbing system. And this high-intensity industrial demand, it doesn't just strain the system. It lands smack bang in the middle of a pre-existing and, frankly, highly aggressive fight over the remaining water. The underlying stress in Central Texas, and really beyond, centers on water rights, often
Yeah.
dictated by these complex groundwater conservation districts.
Yeah, and the specific legal opposition we're tracking involves one of the largest agricultural players in the whole region, Wayne Sanderson Farms. They've actually joined the legal opposition against East Texas water export permits.
This action by Sanderson Farms is really crucial context for you listening. Water export. This attempt to move huge quantities of water out of one area for use somewhere else, typically big metropolitan areas. That's the primary political and economic flashpoint in Texas water politics. It's huge.
Okay.
So the litigation by Sanderson Farms, it underscores just how high the value of regional water already is. If an agricultural giant whose entire business depends on stable water supply is willing to go to court just to stop water from leaving the area, well, that signals that every drop is already accounted for and highly valued for the existing regional economies.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for me. This inherent conflict, the paradox, right? You've got
Yeah.
the city councils greenlighting massive permanent water users to come in and set up shop next to this planned nuclear power backbone.
Hmm.
While at the same time, a powerful regional entity like Sanderson Farms is fighting tooth and nail to prevent water from leaving. Both actions seem rooted in a fear of scarcity, but the council's move dramatically ramps up the regional consumption side of that equation.
Oh, absolutely. It creates an intense, almost zero-sum competition for the existing resource pool. You have agricultural demand, which is massive but often seasonal, maybe subject to some conservation mandates, now competing directly with industrial demand from these huge tech corporations. And data centers, they're backed by multi-billion-dollar corporate budgets and this absolute need for 247 high availability operations. They often have significant leverage in securing those non-negotiable water permits.
So what happens when a drought hits? Whose needs get prioritized? Is it the food production facility, Sanderson Farms, that's been operating there for generations? Or is it the new AI data center that promises high-tech jobs? The pressure on the local water management districts must be just immense.
It is, and the data centers, they present really unique challenges.
Yeah.
Their demand is fixed, it's immediate, and it's required for cooling these incredibly valuable assets. They often use evaporative cooling, like we said, which makes the water usage arguably less efficient in terms of total community benefit compared to, say, water use for irrigation that might recharge groundwater somewhat,
Right.
or municipal use where some water gets treated and returned to the system.
Right, it just goes up into the air.
Exactly. So this substitution of preventing water export for allowing massive fixed industrial water consumption, it puts an immense strain on the long-term sustainability of agriculture and, frankly, the water security of existing residents. These new high-tech developments are introducing a massive fixed, non-negotiable demand right into the middle of an environment that's already litigious and highly unstable when it comes to water.
Okay, so the conflict isn't just playing out in the courts or over permits for clean water. The sources we looked at point to an even more significant kind of hidden risk that takes place hundreds, maybe thousands of feet below the surface. We need to pivot now from water quantity to water quality and these inherent dangers of compounding new consumption with the legacy of, well, decades of oil and gas operations.
Yeah, we have to start with the environmental policy context here. Texas is grappling with water scarcity, and one way it's trying to cope is by attempting to recycle a truly massive waste stream, produced water.
Produced water, right? That's the toxic, super salty wastewater byproduct of oil and gas drilling, often extracted in volumes far exceeding the actual oil or gas, right?
Exactly. And it's not just like regular industrial waste. Produced water is characterized by extremely high salinity. We're talking often 10 times saltier than seawater. It's got high concentrations of heavy metals, things like arsenic and lead, and critically naturally occurring radioactive materials, or NOR.
Norm. Naturally occurring radioactive materials. Okay. Yet, our sources detail that new Texas laws now allow, quote, treated, produced water to be put into streams and onto farmland. The MoneyWise source specifically notes a new state law that permits the use of fracking wastewater for crops.
It's a policy response, really driven by desperation over scarcity, isn't it? Trying to turn this huge liability into some kind of asset. But this raises a really important question. What is the true enforceable definition of treated? And how does this affect the safety perception of the regional water supply, especially when this water is used on agricultural products or released into streams that eventually feed into larger watersheds?
Wait a second. If the composition is that toxic heavy metals, extreme salt, radioactive materials, the treatment required must be technologically immense and probably really costly. Is the regulatory environment truly prepared to enforce the standards needed to make this water genuinely safe for use on food?
Well, history suggests we should be cautious. The Grist article, for instance, highlights failed regulation in places like Oklahoma, where toxic wastewater has literally just poured out of the ground.
Yeah.
This was due to, inadequate regulatory oversight and intense pressure to dispose of the waste quickly and cheaply.
Not encouraging.
Not at all.
Yeah.
And the treatment process necessary to remove those high concentrations of dissolved solids, which is what you need for agricultural reuse, it's extraordinarily energy intensive and expensive. So the pressure to reuse this water, driven by scarcity, puts intense strain on the regulatory bodies. It creates a really high-risk scenario for contamination of the surface water supply chain and potentially agricultural produce itself.
Okay, so we have that policy risk of trying to reuse this stuff on the surface. But now let's look underground at the profound hydrogeological risk. This is where the new demand, the data centers pumping clean water, converges with the old infrastructure, the legacy of oil and gas.
Right. The mechanism that, you rightly picked up on involves the fate of all that deep, high-pressure wastewater. When oil and gas companies finished drilling decades ago, they either capped the well, often poorly, creating what we now call an orphan well if the responsible company vanished, or they converted it into a disposal well for reinjection.
Let's focus on reinjection for a second. What exactly is that, and why does it create a geological risk?
Reinjection is basically long-term waste storage. Operators take these vast quantities of produced water and they push it under pressure miles deep back into non-potable rock formations, usually far, far below the clean, fresh aquifers that provide drinking water.
Okay.
The crucial point here is pressure. If you continuously inject fluids into a closed geological system over decades and decades, you are significantly increasing the pressure in those deep rock layers. That pressure is the source of the contamination threat.
And tied into this are the orphan wells, these old abandoned structures, often just capped with cement or mud seals that are now degrading after decades underground. One question that came up in our source material was, how many orphan oil wells are actually in Central Texas? The fact that the number is basically unknown, but likely enormous, well, that represents this latent instability and a potential pathway for contamination, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Those old seals, they're the weakest link in the entire subsurface containment chain. They are the potential funnels, the potential conduits. Now, overlay this scenario, pressurized, contaminated water deep underground, potentially leaky old wells, with the new high-tech users' massive demand for clean water from above. What happens physically when the data centers start pulling millions upon millions of gallons of clean water from the shallow aquifers right above these zones?
Okay. This leads us to the most complex risk you mentioned, subsidence and breakthrough.
Precisely. Now we enter the realm of hydrogeological instability. Think of the ground structure, all the sediment and porous rock that make up the aquifers, like a giant waterlogged sponge sitting under the immense weight of the earth above it.
Okay.
When you apply that weight, and then you rapidly suck the water out, the aquifer drawdown caused by heavy industrial pumping for data center. Cooling, the physical structure compacts. It compresses.
Right, the ground surface settles or sinks, that's subsidence.
Exactly. And that compaction, that shifting, it doesn't just happen at the surface we see. It runs deep. It destabilizes the rock layers that are supposed to separate the clean, low-pressure aquifers from those deep, high-pressure wastewater storage layers.
Yeah.
And the result, well, the potential result, is the breakage of those fragile, decades-old cement or mud seals on the Orphan wells.
Wow. So the high-tech users' non-negotiable demand for clean water could physically cause the structural failure needed for the high-pressure, legacy-contaminated water that produced water that's been reinjected down below for years to be funneled upward into the clean drinking supply through those now broken seals. The clean water goes out at the top, and the toxic contaminants rush in from below.
That's the risk scenario, yes. If we connect this to the bigger picture, we see a potentially dangerous feedback loop. The city councils approve the high-tech users, presumably for economic growth, but those users require massive, sustained clean water withdrawals. That withdrawal could then exacerbate the geological instability, which then allows decades of contained, toxic-produced water to breach containment and contaminate the overall resource pool, using these existing weed points, the Orphan wells, as pathways. It's the convergence of new growth and old waste, catalyzed by resource depletion.
So the decisions made in the Bryan City Council chamber, focusing on economic zoning, have potentially activated conflicts on 3 distinct levels all at once. This surface-level political conflict over water allocation, like with Sanderson Farms.
Right.
The policy conflict over potentially unsafe wastewater reuse.
Yes.
And this deep subsurface geological risk of destabilizing decades-old oil and gas infrastructure.
That triple threat is clear. New, non-negotiable demand, existing severe conflict over resources, and potentially destabilizing the underground geology, turning what was maybe a quantity problem into an irreparable quality disaster.
Okay, let's try to summarize this Central Texas paradox for you, the listener. On one hand, the region is actively embracing this high-tech, future-focused identity. We see it with the RELLIS nuclear project, the greenlighting of the Bryan development corridor.
Pushing for it.
But this technology is critically dependent on a single, scarce resource, water. And it's entering an environment that is already stressed, highly valued, and frankly litigious over that very resource. The Sanderson Farms fight over export permits demonstrates that perfectly. The scale of the new demand is just massive. It's fixed. It's non-negotiable.
Right. And maybe most alarming, the very act of extracting the necessary volumes of clean water for this new development, all that pumping for those thirsty data centers may be fundamentally increasing the risk of contaminating the remaining clean supply. This contamination pathway isn't just, a wild theory. It's a recognized hydrogeological mechanism. Subsidence causing breaches in old oil and gas infrastructure, specifically those deteriorating seals on Orphan wells, allowing the upward migration of pressurized toxic produced water from deep below.
It really shows that progress in the form of high-tech development is far more than just an economic decision, doesn't it? It's a really complex, multi-layered environmental trade-off. It impacts future water quantity and quality. The city council decisions, while maybe focused on tangible economic growth, seem to have inadvertently activated these profound conflicts, both in the surface-level political sphere and the subsurface geological environment. They might be trading near-term economic gain for potentially irreversible long-term ecological risk.
Yeah, it really forces the community to grapple with the true cost of progress. When that progress depends on liquidating, or at least seriously risking, their most essential natural resource.
And considering those new laws allowing wastewater reuse on the surface, plus this risk that subsidence caused by the high-tech users' massive water demand could physically funnel pre-existing wastewater contamination into those clean aquifers from below. The whole conversation just shifts, doesn't it?
Completely.
We move from asking that critical, familiar question, do we have enough water for this growth, which is already a tough question, to the much darker and maybe more immediate question, will the water we have left, regardless of the quantity, even be usable? The convergence of this shiny, high-tech growth and the messy legacy of old oil infrastructure, it creates this unique, complex, and potentially really dangerous environmental calculus for Central Texas that it feels like maybe no one has fully accounted for yet.
And that calculus, that's what every resident in the region will be living with, potentially for decades to come.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope this synthesis helps you navigate the complex implications of these local decisions playing out right now.